Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. We're going to get started here in just a couple minutes. We'll just let everybody have time to log on. Thank you. All right, welcome everyone. We are so excited that you have joined us today for our webinar from the Seamless Transfer Pathways Project, which is Insights to Actions, New Approaches to Seamless Transfer on Your Campus. My name is Leslie Darty, and I'm going to get us started off today. I am an education designer here at the Education Design Lab, and I served as a Seamless Transfer Pathways coach for this past year and a half design year. All right. Some housekeeping things as we go on. Number one, this session is being recorded and it will be posted to our website after the call. As of right now, all the callers have been muted. We're going to collect questions as we go along. If you have a question, please type it into our Q&A box at the bottom, or we are on Twitter as well, and you can tweet your questions with the hashtag Seamless Transfer, and you can follow us at the Ed Design Lab. Any additional questions or inquiries we have can be submitted to our email, which is seamlesstransfer@eddesignlab.org. So again, we're going to be answering some questions and answers throughout, we'll be answering questions throughout the webinar. And so anytime you have a question, feel free to put it in our Q&A box in Zoom, or again, you can tweet that out. If you have a question for one of our teams, just please indicate that in the Q&A box by putting Florida, Illinois, Texas, or Virginia. If you don't have a question for somebody in particular and would like to address it to anybody, just leave that blank or put all or any. This is a quick overview of what we're going to go through today. We are going to have a quick introduction to the Ed Design Lab, followed by more information about the Seamless Transfer Pathways Design Challenge, overview of the pilot, and then we're going to get into Q&As with the teams as well as your Q&As, talk about what's next, and then we will have a closing. Again, I'm Leslie Darty, and I'm an education designer with the Ed Design Lab. Also from the lab today, we have Kathleen Delasky, our president and founder, and Ben Doe, another education designer, and also the project manager for our STP project. We want to give a special shout out and thank you to our partners at the National Institute for the Study of Transfer students who, if you did not see, had their call for proposals for their 2020 conference, which is going to be February 5th through 7th in Atlanta, Georgia. So if you have not, definitely check out NISDS and also think about those proposals. All right, we are going to jump in. So quickly, in the summer of 2017, we had a call for proposals for our Seamless Transfer Design project. We received over 100 RFPs and 4 different cohorts throughout the U.S. were selected. So we have some special presenters representing these teams on the call today. From our Florida cohort, we have Julie Alexander from Miami-Dade College, Janie Valdez from Florida International University from Illinois, Bob Parsi from Harper College, and Ron Smith from Northern Illinois University. From our Texas team, we have Cameron Neal representing Collin College and Gene Keller, the University of North Texas. And last but not least, our team from Virginia, which we have Barbara Hopkins from Northern Virginia Community College and Sally Lawrenson from George Mason University. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to Kathleen Delasky, our, again, president and founder, to talk a little bit more about the lab. Kathleen?
design teams between the two institutions that represent the entire student journey. It's really opened our eyes, and I think opened everyone's eyes who's been involved. So I want to thank the teams for working together so well over the past time, and you'll hear from everyone today. So my job is to say a little bit about the lab and the design thinking process that we use, as well as the sort of a very, very high level overview of the design challenge. I'm hoping that I've got a little bit of a delay on my slide. So Leslie, if you can also, it's not allowing me to advance the slide. So if you could go to the next slide, if you can. We're trying shared control of the screen, and we're hoping that's going to work. So anyway, the lab, we've just celebrated our 5-year anniversary, and we've at this point worked with about 100 colleges and universities around the country, and we really try to focus on what we call new traditional students, and transfers fit right into this this focus, because so many transfers are new traditional students, and by that we mean students who have really are not full-time necessarily. They often are working. They're often lower income. They might be rural. They might be parents. They might be single moms. You get the idea. It's sort of it's definitely what used to be called non-traditional students, which now have become the very much the majority. And so we've also worked a lot with employers, and increasingly we're working with states and systems of colleges and community colleges, and even cities who are really trying to solve economic development and workforce issues. And we're focused always on the kind of the persistent workforce ready gap, as well as these 3 key design criteria: affordability, relevance, and portability. And all 3 of those play really importantly into the seamless transfer pathway work. Leslie, if you could go to the next slide. Thank you. So we have 3 categories to our work, which I'll just mention quickly. One are these, increasingly we are pulling together cohorts of colleges or universities into learning communities, really, that go through a design process together. And these are some of the categories of design challenges that we've done. And we always have a design question, and we'll talk about that in a second. But these are some of the types of projects that we're working on. Next slide. And the other big category of work that we're doing increasingly is looking not so much at degree programs or degree completion programs, but really this emerging digital credential ecosystem that's starting to come into focus as institutions and employers and students are looking at more modular forms of learning and often sub-degree credentials. So we're really exploring and trying to build use cases for new types of credentials, and really keeping the student's needs front and center, rather than whatever startup is trying to pitch a new idea. It's like, what do the students need in this mix? That's what we're focused on in that part of the work. And then the last category, on the next slide, is really around this design process I mentioned. So this gives you a sense of the design process we use, and the one that we did use for the past 1.5 years with the seamless transfer pathway work. But it's really about, from the very beginning, looking at the student's needs and getting the student journey, getting down at ground level to understand the student journey. And you'll hear more about that from the institutions in a few minutes. And then I just have 3 quick slides to kind of ground everybody around what is human-centered design. Like, what are we talking about here? We've heard that it might be student-centered, but how does it work? So if you could go to the next slide. So it's really, there are these 3 themes: empathy, invention, iteration, that kind of drive a lot of the activities and the exercises and what we do in some of the sessions. But we're really looking at the student journey, like what is actually happening as somebody thinks about going to community college, and what happens to them when they get there. What are their needs, their motivations, and their behaviors as they're thinking about transferring? What stands in their way? How do they feel about their self-esteem or their confidence or their sense of belonging? So you'll hear about some of this in this challenge. But then we move into an invention phase, and we I'm sorry if you go back for a second, and then iteration is one of the themes as well. Now you can go to that slide. So in the process that we do, we often are moving back and forth between an understand phase and an ideation around prototypes for pilots, and then moving into designing pilots and launching. In this work, we did go in a linear fashion, but we often found ourselves, sort of stepping back and coming back. When we tested a prototype, we would come back and say, okay, well, this is prompting more ideas. We can make this better. So there's a learning cycle that happens. It's been very effective. Next slide. And then the last thing about design mindset is to say that I won't go through these sorts of themes that we consider, but the idea is, in higher ed, everybody's passionate about students, but there are a lot of constraints, right? So we often start with the constraints rather than starting with the possibilities. And, flipping that model is one of the important things to try to do. I mean, there are many other things to say about design mindset, but just to give you a sense of it, that gets us started on that. And then if you could go to the next slide, I'm just going to give you 2 or 3 points about this design challenge before you meet the cohort and get to know each of the teams. So this was the design challenge that we set out in the summer of 2017 that prompted 100 applications to be part of this design cohort, because we know that this issue is really at the center of what so many community colleges and 4 years are struggling with, is how do we remove the barriers to make transfer happen and then attainment to happen. And so we really set the bar high to ask people to be really to think transformationally rather than incrementally. Next slide. We had a challenge goal of 30% within 6 years. So every time we thought about the kind of prototypes we would do, we asked the question, okay, is that going to have the kind of impact that we need to be successful and to hit our goal? So, these are some of the ways we looked at doing that, and you'll hear more about that in a minute. And I think, this just gives you a little sense of the roadmap. And we are, if you ask where we are now, we are in this last phase. After number 5, we have now been working on pilots and doing pilot design, and the pilots are all now expected to launch in September. And so this gives you a sense of the times we've come together and the work we've done together. And with that, I think we have, yes, now you're going to meet the, I'll turn it back over to Leslie, who will introduce each team, because they came to a final pilot after looking at a lot of prototypes and have spent the last year actually building out these prototypes, which we'll hear about now.
Thanks, Kathleen. I really appreciate that. And so the first team that we have coming up is our team from Florida. And so again, from Florida, we have Janie Valdez, who's from Florida International University, and Julie Alexander from Miami-Dade College. So Janie and Julie, can you start us off?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Janie. Let me offer, I think, some context around how we ended up with this idea of transformation. So FIU and MDC have had a very a long-standing relationship as community college and college partners. And we have about 4,200 students a year who transition from Miami-Dade to FIU. And today, about 81% of those transition with the AA degree, which is pretty phenomenal. And one of the things that we have as part of our partnership is something called the Connect for Success pathway. And this is a pathway that really guarantees admission to Miami-Dade College students who transition to FIU with the AA degree within 3 years. And we have some benefits along the way for the students to basically stay connected to FIU while at Miami-Dade, et cetera. And we started really doing a deeper dive on tracking those students. And what we did is we learned that students were performing, Connect for Success students were performing better at Miami-Dade College. They had higher retention rates, they had higher graduation rates. And then we started seeing some increases in our own 3- and 4-year graduation rates from those students. But when we really dug deeper, right, looked at some of the subpopulations, one of the ones that really was highlighted was our STEM population. And so here, what we were noticing is that when we looked at the number of students who started at Miami-Dade and had intended to be STEM majors, and then those who actually graduated from Miami-Dade and transitioned, you know, that there was a big gap there. There was a big leak there, to use our design language. And then, you know, at FIU, once they transitioned, the students found themselves having to complete more lower division prerequisites because they weren't necessarily ready for their major. So even though we have this great percentage of students who transition with BAA, our STEM students really are not what we call transfer ready. And what that means is that they have their major, you know, ready, they have all the prerequisites met, and if it's a limited access major, they have that minimum GPA requirement. And that's a big problem because in the state of Florida, there is also a statute that basically says that if students surpass their program requirements by 110%, then they get charged 100% of their tuition rate, which generally means for students that you can get charged a little over $100 per credit hour, beginning at the 132nd credit for 120, degree requirement. And that's a big, big deal. So when we dug deeper to our data, we noticed that our biology and engineering students in particular, 36% of them had actually graduated with excess credit hours compared to 18% of transfer students in all other majors combined. So that's a really big problem. That's a really big gap and a really big leak. And so we really committed to working on that. So transformation is really this build of this very holistic pathway that starts from day one, identifying students whose goals are to obtain that bachelor's degree, provide that clear pathway, and thinking about bringing in, of course, faculty engagement, curricular alignment around that piece, because students were telling us they needed early exposure to the major and just an increased awareness of what it means to be a STEM major around academics. We need to help students through the pathway in a meaningful time frame, one that makes sense, and that also means to build it for all our students, not just our optimal students. That's really an important point because both Miami-Dade and FIU have an access mission. And so I think it's very easy for people to say, well, we're just going to increase our GPA requirements. We're going to, stop students from entering FIU who are not ready because they don't have these prerequisites, but that's not the route that we want to go to. So for us, looking at every student possibility was really, really important. And we want to obviously increase and expedite the transfer out rate at Miami-Dade College for these students. And in the process, we're also going to provide some very tailored STEM-focused advising with term-by-term plans that are combined with Miami-Dade requirements and FIU requirements, and also have this set of milestones built in. And so really looking at this very holistic, comprehensive pathway that they can go through. And I'll let my colleague Julie talk a little bit more about, maybe Julie in particular, some of those obstacles that students experience right at the onset of entry related to math, which we know is such a big challenge for STEM majors.
Thank you, Janie. Good afternoon, all. I think Janie provided a very comprehensive overview, and to avoid any kind of delay in moving forward with the presentation, I will just say one thing, and that is that we focused on biology with that pathway with the intent that we would learn from the structures that we put in place and then expand it beyond biology and then share outside of our two institutions. And so with that, I will pass it on to Illinois.
Thanks, Julie and Janie, for that. All right, and so next we have Bob Parsi, who's coming to us from Harper College, and we also have Ron Smith from Northern Illinois University.
Thanks, Leslie. So we're a community college located outside of Chicago. And we have strong partnerships with our high school districts and with colleges such as Northern Illinois University. So when we approached the design challenge, we decided we were going to look at what was the best way to increase bachelor attainment. We felt really strong that we needed to include one of our high school districts, one of our strongest partners, which we did in District 211, so that we could create a business pathway that would allow students from the time that they're in high school to be able to see in a timely manner. Our goals were pretty succinct. We wanted to have it done in a shorter period of time. We wanted to reduce the cost for students as much as possible. So by working with District 211 and working with Northern Illinois University, we were able to create a business degree pathway program, which allows the student to, while early in high school, identify if they're interested in business. They can identify this as an opportunity for them to work with their high school counselors, their faculty, their leaders in high school, and we identified a very succinct pathway that leveraged dual credit classes in high school that allow you to graduate from high school with anywhere from 20 to 27 credits of college, transition to Harper, be at Harper for basically a year, including summers, and then get to NIU as a junior, but with already having many of the having their associate's degree completed, and allowing them to then spend the last 2 years at NIU to earn a bachelor's degree in 8 different disciplines. The reason we selected business is because business is a very popular program in high school, college, and of course Northern has one of the strongest business programs that we know in the country. So we felt like business made a lot of sense. Again, reiterating the point that was made earlier, we went into it not really knowing how we were going to increase bachelor completion. That's a really important part to kind of know. Don't go into it thinking you have the answers. But then at some point you have to define what it is that you're actually going to try to bring to market. And that's how we were able to create the business pathway. Ron, anything to add?
All right, I don't know if Ron is having a little bit problem with his audio, but we'll go ahead and we will we'll take it to Texas. And from Texas, we have Cameron Neal from Collin College on the phone, and Gene Keller from the University of Northern Texas.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Cameron Neal. I deal with articulation and transfer at Collin College. And our goal, mandated by the state, is to try to get transfer programs to 120 total hours for a bachelor's degree. And we found out that that is extremely difficult in transfer. Some of the degrees that are supposed to be extremely transfer friendly, like Bachelor of Arts in Applied Science, still challenging. We can get down to something like 123, but not 120 hours. Even at Collin College now is allowed to offer a couple of bachelor's degrees. So in effect, we transfer to ourselves, and even in those programs, we have difficulty limiting a degree to 120 hours. So that was our focus, to try to get students that we could get to a degree at 120 hours, and we started looking at some things like goal setting and early intervention and things like that. But after a while, in our focus, when we talked to some students and they talked about how they come in and they explore, and then they change majors, and then they drop out of school for a while and they come back. It is hard to get an early focus. So we concentrated on a type of student that we call the wanderer. The student who tries a little bit of this, tries a little bit of that, maybe doesn't quite focus early. There are many of us, even in this audience, who need a hard deadline before we start really concentrating. That's part of human nature. So we decided, rather than to focus on the students specifically, that we would focus on the degree. and University of North Texas was the big leader in this. Let's create a general business degree where the student can come in with either an Associate of Arts or Associate of Science degree, no specific prerequisites, and transfer directly to University of North Texas, take another 60 hours, and complete a Bachelor of Science in Business degree. What was really fortunate for us is at the same time University of North Texas is opening or has opened a new campus in Frisco, and that campus wants to use some new academic models, very project-based, very industry internship-based. And so they were looking for a way to do some curriculum that redesigned too. So in the model, UNT has designed a fully accredited Bachelor of Science in Business program in which the students will obtain their prerequisite skills, not courses, their prerequisite skills within their junior year. I know in one of the webinars, Dr. Glasper from the League of Innovation focused on something called unbundling. So we're trying to unbundle the prerequisites from specific courses that tend to stack up a little too high and put the prerequisite skills needed in specific courses in the junior year to get students on track so they can get through with 120 hours.
All right. Thank you so much, Team Texas. And again, last but not least, we are excited to have our team from Virginia. So Barb and Sally, I'll hand it over to you guys.
Thanks, Leslie, for that. So we're excited to tell you about our program called Advance, and more specifically, our idea of Vance, who we'll talk about in a moment. But we, much like the partner schools that you've heard from already, have launched a partnership program between our two institutions who already had an incredibly strong transfer relationship with about 70% of our students here at George Mason University coming through, that were transfers coming directly from Northern Virginia Community College, and over 4,000 students a year coming through transfer process. So we stood up 21 in our first year in 2018 pathways, academic pathways for our students to complete an associate's degree at Nova and a bachelor's degree at Mason, and added a variety of different supports as a part of that, including early access to resources at Mason and continuing access to resources at Northern Virginia Community College after the student had fully transitioned. Students are allowed to co-enroll in courses across the two institutions in order to stay on track, and they're also supported by a dedicated success coach who's focused on really walking with them throughout that process. So as we were doing that, we really started to think about where our biggest holes in our relationship and in the student experience were. And one of the major things we identified was the need to really enhance our communication across our two institutions and for our students to feel like they were getting consistent answers to their questions. And so through our process of working with various students who had been through the transfer process, and even some of our initial students in the advanced program, we found that best laid plans at two very large institutions, we were finding that students could still get inconsistent information and be challenged to find the right information all the time. And so we came up with the idea of Vance, our mobile app and AI, artificial intelligence concept, to really pull in students' kind of use of things like Siri in the Apple world or Alexa in the Amazon world to help solve their problems and give them answers, and thought about what it would be like for our students to have that kind of resource 24/7 that was really supporting their navigation and self-service around our advanced program. We also know that our enrollment goals are enormous for this program. Just in our first year, we've already increased our goals and look to the future to see several thousand students in the program. And so the human components of supporting them with the success coach need additional scaffolding because we won't be able to hire hundreds of success coaches to support our students. And so we've leaned on this concept of VANCE to really help us build that out in a way that students could have more confidence in their self-service options provided across the two institutions. And then I'm going to allow Barbara to talk more about how we've specialized our focus with VANCE.
Yes, we've been really excited about VANCE and the whole idea of this and helping to support our students in the advanced program. But we quickly realized that our focus was really broad and there was just way too much information to work with in order to make available for students. So we said we needed to narrow our focus. And what we decided is coming up in our second year of our advanced launch in fall 19, we have now gone from 21 academic pathways to 102 academic pathways, which is, of course, a lot. And so what we decided was let's focus in terms of our pilot, let's focus our pilot on those programs that have what we consider second gate requirements. And second gate is basically requirements that are program specific and in addition to the regular standardized advanced program milestone requirements. And so as an example for nursing, we do have a competitive nursing program. So while you can be in advance and you can select the nursing program, you still have to be able to get into the nursing program. So that's what we call a second gate requirement. It's a competitive program. So we realized that out of the, right now we currently have 430 students at the end of our first year of advance. And going into our second year, we have 430 students, and out of those, roughly 45% of them, which is about 190 of them, are interested in and enrolled in these programs that have some sort of second gate requirements. Some of the second gate requirements are like a certain GPA in major coursework and that kind of thing. So we wanted to focus on information for those programs because it can be a little confusing, not just for students, but even for the advisors who advise them. So, in focusing on this, we wanted to ensure that students were able to get their questions answered, that we had set responses for those questions. And again, this is good not only for students, but also for advisors and for anyone at our two institutions that are trying to help support students.
All right, thanks, Team Virginia, and thanks everybody for sharing that information. It's great information that we have in regards to the pilots and how they have formed and shaped over the past year and a half. And so now we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the insights and themes. And so I'm going to hand it back over to Kathleen to ask some questions. And just a reminder, everybody out there, if you want to, or if you have any questions, go ahead and keep asking those questions, or again, tweeting them with the hashtag seamless transfer. So, Kathleen.
Great. So we're going to ask each team a question or two and then pause for some audience questions if we have some coming in, so you don't have to wait till the end. We want to kind of do this interactively throughout. And so I will start with the Collin and UNT team. Cameron mentioned that they developed this persona, or that they found, for that team, I thought it was so interesting that one of the biggest ahas was that our undecided students are particularly at risk of not finishing or not attaining the four-year degree, even though many of them want to. And because of either the excess credits, or they come across to the four-year and they see how much they have to accomplish, and it's a barrier to completion. And so I thought it was so interesting that you found a way that your pilot ended up focusing on the undecided student and what do we do for them. So that's what excites me most about your pilot. But let me ask Jean and Cameron, what excites you most about the pilot? Because you came to the table a year ago with 4 really good ideas that came out of the design process, and this is the one you picked.
Yeah, what really gets me interested in the pilot is for one thing, in Texas, we're doing something called setting up fields of study for different areas, for biology, for history, for business. So we have a very well-defined business field of study. And if a student starts out knowing they're going to be a business major in their freshman year, they can follow a business field of study and get a BBA degree. If they start out just wanting to go to college, they'll miss that. They'll miss that opportunity. They will start having excess hours. But one thing, sometimes the strength of a program can also be reflected another way as a weakness. The field of study gives a very clear path, but it gives everybody an identical path. And one of the things that University of North Texas really wanted to focus on was providing students a little bit different type of education. Again, more project-based, more internship-based. And we had some discussions about if everybody has the identical background, is that really a strength of the program, or in some ways is that a weakness? If you have a great deal of diversity in backgrounds and educations, can that actually create a strength for the program? So that's one thing I'm excited about. The other part is just to focus on learning outcomes rather than specific courses.
And Jean, how about you? Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I'm excited about the initiatives that Cameron talked about. I think one of the things that's most important to us is the marketability of the students. And there is growth in new businesses and industry in the Collin County area. And by having our new campus located there, the students will be able to go into the marketplace and certainly earn good livable wages. And then one of the other things that's very exciting to me about this new opportunity is we think it's scalable. If this works well, we think that some of our other degrees that will be offered at the UNT campus in Frisco will see this model as something that will work for them, and we'll see some new degrees come that will be helpful to students who are transferring without clear pathways, as Cameron said, of knowing what they want to do, but we can complete them in a timely manner.
Right. I know one of the reasons that the Texas team and the Illinois team focused on a business degree for the pilot was because there was more flexibility in your degree requirements, but that you could use it as a test case and then scale it to more complicated majors. Great. So let's move now to a question for the Illinois team. And actually, first, Ron, since you didn't get to make any opening comments, let's test your audio. Are you back with us? I think he's still having. Bob, you're going to have to speak for the team, or maybe Ron can give us some comments in the chat box.
Okay.
What was your aha moment in the design process? Where did it hit you that, oh, this is a different kind of process, and we're getting these insights from what we're learning about our students and about their pathways?
Well, Ron and I discussed this one question a little bit before the webinar, so I could share some of his thoughts. I think when you look at your own data, sometimes you're surprised by what you see. And I think we felt that the numbers of people from the slide you're sort of looking at today is, we looked at the 2010 graduates from District 211 and what happened to them over a 6-year period of time. And I think we felt like the numbers were going to be pretty strong because Northern is one of our top transfer schools. And what we kind of learned was they weren't as good as we thought they were going to be, and that there's a lot of places where people can fall out of the flow, out of the pipeline, that if you don't take a moment to step back and really look at where each of these puzzle pieces sort of represents where people can fall away, then how do you really know how to address the issue? And what we learned in the aha moment was that, yeah, we have all this data, but are we looking at it the right way? And then when we looked at it, we were sort of like, wow, there's some work to be done to figure out how to create more consistency between the three partner institutions, because we were losing people and not really always knowing why or where they went or what happened. And the net result was much lower than what we had hoped it would be or what we thought it would be. Now, on the glass half full side, that gives us an opportunity to really streamline and tighten up some of those matriculations from high school to community college to a four-year. Gives us a chance to really tighten those pathways up a little bit, which is, I think, really where the origin of the pathways concept kind of came from, because we saw where people were leaking out of the funnel. And boy, if we could just, even just better understand what it takes to get from Harper to NIU and to do a finance degree. If we could tighten that up a little bit, we knew that we could be more successful in helping students to complete their objectives. But, the most important thing we learned was look at your own data and don't be afraid to see what you're seeing, but to really understand what it means and how you can use it to springboard into new direction, which is what this project really helped us to do.
Can you guys hear me? This is Ron.
Yay, we can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Go for it.
I apologize for the previous technical issues. I had issues with the computer as well as with the phone line. So once again, my apologies. But I'm in my coworker's office and wanted to contribute. So Bob, thank you for covering during the last couple slides. But some of the feedback I'd like to add as it relates to the aha moment, I think that there were a couple aha moments for me personally, and I think the team may share them. One is we didn't know what we didn't know. Secondly is I think we went into it with the perspective of we thought we may know the solution, which is kind of contradictory to we didn't know what we didn't know, but I think we had an idea of what the solution could be because we have a strong relationship with Harper, and they're one of our strongest community college partners. So we started with the mindset of let's just take a look at the highest transfer programs, and surely that's going to lead us down the right path. Well, we started out with that mindset, and business was one of those programs, but there were two other programs. And as we began to mine the data, we realized that although all three of those programs have high interest and high initial transfer, the attrition rate and completion rate for the other two programs was not the same as it was with business. So we had to kind of redefine our focus and kind of double down on business. I think another aha moment is let the data tell you the story. So if you go into it thinking you know the solution and you don't have a plan B ready in case that solution is not aligning with your investigation, you may find yourself in trouble. So I think we were lucky enough to identify that problem early on and recalibrate and focus on just the singular business pathway. And I think by doing that, we've been much more successful. So I had a number of aha moments, but those are the ones that come to mind.
So I actually want to pause right now and ask a question that's come in from the audience, which is from Lead MN, is that Minnesota maybe? So thank you for sending the question. What data did you track to identify these leaks in the transfer pipeline? I think since both Bob and Ron just talked about the ahas from the data, what data did you bring to this map that we did? We did this picture that you're seeing here is the map where we actually mapped the cohort from start to finish. In this case, for Harper and Northern Illinois, starting in high school, and we mapped out the data. But I think it's a great question. What data did you use?
Sure. This is Ron. One of the criteria that we looked at was success in some of the early math courses and business calc specifically. And once we were able to identify that, what was unique and very helpful was we were able to get the input from the faculty of the math department as well as the business department and connect them with administrators and instructors from the high school component or a high school partner and create that conversation so that they can begin to speak to areas that we believe contribute to gateway courses or roadblocks or things of that nature. But specifically, we looked at the completion and success rate for business calc at NIU.
Mm-hmm. Bob, did you want to add anything there? I know we've tried to get data on the sort of the who was stopping out and asking them a lot of questions as well.
Hi, so thanks. So we also started with, we started at the beginning, we looked at the District 211 2010 graduates, how many came to Harper, how many of them matriculated to NIU. We also looked at first generation. We also looked at, different student segment populations to try to figure out who our target audience would be. But it was a great example of aligning 3 institutions in one data set to come up with the final some synopsis of where people landed, even looking at things like the clearinghouse and where did they end up going? Did they go to different institutions? They didn't go anywhere, or they started at Harper but never transferred to NIU. So we really dug deep into the data, but it was a great a moment where collaboration between the 3 parties really worked to synthesize the data and come up with a truly good understanding of that population and some of the subpopulations as well. So when you do this with a partner school, make sure that the data folks are really talking to each other. And we had a good support from all the research arms of the different institutions, but it was a moment of true collaboration. And that's why it was kind of eye-opening to see where people actually were going and what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, did anyone, any of the other teams, maybe like if one other person, I don't want to spend too long on this question, but it is a very important piece, is what data do you bring to the table for the entire student journey? Does anyone else from one of the other institutions want to take a crack at that question or describe anything different from what Bob and Ron have said?
Kathleen, this is Leslie. I think, Sally, I know that you had said something.
Yeah,
would you like to contribute? Thanks.
Sure. So for the George Mason and Northern Virginia Community College team, this was just a really good exercise that was actually really challenging to get all the data to align so that we knew we were telling the right story. But one of the things that I think was really important for us was, as we put this program in place, to know that we were obviously going to shift the experience of those students who already would have transferred between the 2 institutions in some ways, but really to figure out, to the idea of these leaks in the process, where were we losing people and how could we really amplify our services to reach that set of populations. And so we noticed both issues around particular colleges that students were transferring into here at Mason, and knew that we needed to have particular focus on curriculum-based issues that may be occurring there. But a lot of what we noticed was that there were not necessarily patterns in our demographics or anything like that that were our indicators of why students were stopping out. And so we worked really hard to make sure that we were doing, and the lab really supported us in this, doing focus groups with students who had actually stopped. Because what we saw was actually consistency in our data about who was persisting and who was not. They looked the same. And so short of a couple patterns, we really had to dig in with our students and found out, in a lot of cases, it's things like life, right? Or that maybe what we thought their goal wasn't really what their goal was. So I just would encourage people to do this activity because it was really meaningful, but also to know that only looking at the quantitative side of it can sometimes remove some of the story you need to see the full picture.
Right, and so yeah, we did this exercise first. We called this the big data exercise, but then we followed it with the kind of empathy mapping and interviewing of students that Sally is describing. Janie, do you want to, from Florida, do you want to throw in your 2 cents on this question before we move on?
So Kathleen, thank you. It was just beautiful what Sally said, and I think that's what we were really going for as well. We conducted several focus groups, and I just really wanted to, make sure to sort of add to that quantitative piece how important the qualitative component is. And I think for us, there were many aha moments when you really get to see the themes that come out of these focus groups and you hear these stories. And there's just nothing that I think can better express empathy than to hear a story. Numbers are impressive, but when you just experience alongside your students, what those setbacks have been. and what they've been through just to go from point A to point B just really strikes you in a way that, you know, a percentage and a number will never do.
Right. Well, we often say that the numbers, the quantitative numbers, give you they tell you where your opportunity space is for design, but the student interviews will tell you what you need to work on and give you more specifics. Okay, let's move to the next question, which we actually have teed up for the Virginia team because they've talked about this issue a lot. You know, how important is it to set up this what we call a design channel, but it's also a communication channel between your two institutions to solve for both? Like how meaningful and eye-opening was setting up this channel? And I think Barbara and Sally are going to take this one.
Yeah, so this is Barbara. Some of the activities that we've had that Sally had already described, we had student focus groups, we had surveys, even we had the gallery walk where we had lots of our evidence and things that we had collected on a wall and just had our stakeholders walk through and look at it. But we learned that students were really concerned about having different responses to their questions. So they could go to a NOVA counselor or person and get a response to a question. They could go to a Mason person and the response may be different. They can go back to a NOVA counselor and get a different response. And, you know, of course, it depended on, okay, what was the student actually needing? Because sometimes the student doesn't always ask the question they really need. But we just noticed that there was just a lot of different kinds of responses for students. And students felt like they couldn't trust the information they were getting. They went to multiple sources because they felt like they couldn't really trust the information. So we really wanted to work on building that student trust and improving communication across our institutions so that the answers that students received were the same answer, was as much as possible a standardized answer for various different responses. And again, this is part of the reasons why we had to narrow down the scope for our pilot, because there are so many questions that could be asked and so many nuances to some of the responses that we said, okay, let's start with something that's a little easier. And so we went with these pathways. And so again, because we're two very large institutions and because we wanted our advanced students to feel like Nighthawk Patriots, those are our two mascots. We want them to feel like Nighthawk Patriots and feel like they have this identity or this affinity with both institutions. We wanted to make sure that, again, what they were receiving, the information they were receiving was the same no matter where they went, whether it was online, whether it was one institution versus another. And so, so this was important to helping to make sure that students got the same message in order to solve their problems, because and what was really key is once we started working on this and we started looking at questions that we could use to get started. So we said, okay, let's come up with, you know, about 100 questions and let's get the answers down, and then we can decide what kind of technology and how best to use it. But as we were trying to answer the questions, what we found is, you know, a NOVA person from a NOVA perspective would answer a question one way. A Mason person from a Mason perspective would answer a question a slightly different way. And so in that really helped us to understand better how the two institutions work and to come together to try to create, okay, what is this answer that we've got to give to our advanced students? As Sally often says, we really have created a third institution in this advanced program because we're really just setting up just a different way of doing things than what we do individually at our two institutions. And so it's been a great learning process. And we've really seen just how nuanced our answers can be to the various questions that students ask. But we also see the holes that we have in the information that we put out there. So it's been really great to be able to work together to look at these ways of communicating and trying harder. We've always tried hard to give good information to students, but this is really helping us to try even harder and to step outside the box to come up with ways to improve that communication.
Mm-hmm. So you talk about creating that your advanced program is almost like creating a third institution where someone who comes into the community college who knows they want to transfer has a family that takes them all the way through this process, so they don't feel like they're, leaving home and going somewhere else and feeling like an outsider in both places. That, to me, that was a huge aha from all the teams. And that's actually a great segue to the next question, if that's okay, which is for the Florida team. We all found an underlying theme, or two underlying themes, that everything underlaid everything was these themes of belonging and trust, that was something students were looking for and often not getting, and it's what caused either fear or sadness or lack of engagement. It displayed in many ways. How are you approaching those themes? I mean, we kind of just heard Barbara say how the Nova and Mason teams approaching it. How in Florida you made this a real central point of your design? Jeannie and Julie, do you want to talk about that?
Sure thing, and I'll start. This is Julie. One thing I'll say is, I'm on the academic affairs side. Janie really straddles both, but I would say more on the student affairs side. And through this process, what we found ourselves doing was really looking at it from the student perspective in a much more holistic way that crossed all boundaries. And so that was very illuminating. There was a point in the process that I'll sort of start with that was very telling. And I think it's a good entree into this conversation about belonging and trust, because we learned quite a bit throughout the process. But the gallery walk was about at the midpoint, I would say, of the process, and they had student reflections. There were some faculty reflections, but student reflections, and a lot of them. And what was a pervasive comment from students was that there was a lack of information, or that there was too much information, that it was hard to synthesize, that they were getting the wrong information, that they were overwhelmed, and that the differences in the campus environments between Miami-Dade College and Florida International University, while we have a lot of commonality, the campus differences and the difference in navigation posed challenges that they weren't ready for upon transfer. And so there's a number of things that we have identified that we really want to build into transformation that speaks to the belonging and trust. And Janie, in our introduction, talked about Connect for Success. Connect for Success is really sort of the next level of transfer infrastructure beyond what we've been doing in Florida. We have a very strong statewide 2+2 infrastructure, but this is kind of the next level, Connect for Success, and it builds in a lot of this belonging and trust, where FIU, Florida International University, has a high touch with Miami-Dade College students while they're making their way through their associate's degree and preparing for the transfer. And so what we really decided to do through 2+2 pathways, which would not just be the academic component, which that's a big part of it, creating 2+2 course sequencing. And so from FTIC at Miami-Dade College all the way through the baccalaureate at FIU, but also, and this is really gets to the belonging, and that is peer-to-peer engagement with leveraging FIU students that have made the transfer and understand sort of that there will be those navigational challenges, and getting them engaged with our students at Miami-Dade College early on and throughout their enrollment at Miami-Dade College. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Janie to add on.
I think that was really comprehensive, Julie. I would say, just for the folks in the audience who may be interested in that deeper partnership, is that one of the ways that we do this is that our success students receive our student ID, FIU student ID, which is known as the One Card. And so that also actually gives them access to go to our libraries. They get invited to special signature events on campus. There's a whole lot of host of things they can do, as they were talking about earlier in Nova and Mason's partnership, is this idea of like building affinity in both places and to maintain that 4-year identity along the way. I think the way that we've looked at this too is, how do you build now, because of our STEM focus, how do you build the affinity to the discipline? And so that you bring in faculty support, and it's not only that peer-to-peer, but can we expand our undergraduate research opportunities to students early on, so that they can see and have a real experiential opportunity, whether it's part of shadowing a research assistant or even sitting in an upper division course, really could be transformational to a student's experience. And then, of course, the question and the challenge is, how do you do that at scale, right? I mean, when students start Miami-Dade, the data showed us that about 8,000 have an intention to pursue a STEM degree. And so how can we build those opportunities both at Miami-Dade and FIU, just to build that sense of belonging across the board, not only with peer-to-peer, but I would also say with staff and faculty.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So at this point, I think we're getting some questions from the audience, and a lot of them are some of the ones that we have planned to ask. So we're going to just keep going. We'll come back to some. So keep sending your questions in. We're seeing a lot of questions that we've got a couple more teed up here that I think are going to answer some of the questions that we're seeing. So actually, staying with the Miami-Dade and FIU team from Florida, we wanted to ask about human-centered design. We get a lot of questions about, what is this design challenge methodology that you're using, and why is it different? So the question here really is, how did it inform your seamless transfer solutions? We've heard you say a few things about this, but if you had to sum it up, what's possible now that wasn't before in terms of the way you look at solutioning?
Yeah, I think, this is Janie. I think that maybe the aha moment here is that we really have to think about this design of, we talked about designing for the extreme user, right? And so when we worked with students along the way in this process, one of my own aha moments is that these are actually the students who are being incredibly proactive. So that if they didn't find something, they asked a peer, they asked their faculty member. And, I think that's a really great thing, but there's this element of how many students will actually just stop and not take that extra step to learn the information, to visit that advisor a second time, to confirm something by looking at a website. And so, so I think that was really so incredibly important, because as I said earlier, we're both institutions who really are so access driven that the goal is not to design for the optimal STEM student. Our optimal STEM student is not starting at Miami-Dade in Calculus 1 and taking all the courses they need and being full-time and having no financial issues and basically being a full-time student. That's just not our student. As you mentioned before, Kathleen, just the modern student doesn't really look like that, freshman that we had so many years ago, the traditional freshman. And so when we started designing, a lot of it started becoming we have to design for the part-time student. We have to design for the student who starts in intermediate algebra, who starts actually potentially in Calculus 1. And what does that really look like, so that every student can see themselves on that pathway? And to me, there's this element here of that's the ultimate sort of access point, is that I see myself in the pathway. This is not impossible for me. And we got that from our students. You know, so when we looked at our data and we learned things like, you know, over 60% of our students were saying, no, I didn't complete all the prerequisites for my major before transferring. Or I know that I'm likely to face excess hours, and that could not only delay my graduation, but potentially prevent it. And so these things were just voiced over and over again, I think, as part of our ongoing work, you know, with having these students with us along the way, whether it's obviously through data and surveys, through focus groups, but having the ones who are with us as part of our process, you know, to constantly look at them. I found myself looking at them constantly. I wasn't the expert anymore. I was like, wait a minute, I want to hear what you have to say. Because I think, you know, we always think we know what they need, and we come with these really great intentions, and some are even data informed, but I want to hear what their reactions are.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that I can do that sometimes anymore without hearing those reactions. I always want to say, you know, let's talk to the students before we dive into this, whatever we're doing in the transfer space.
Right. And it's also important not to talk to just the students that are, you know, sort of signing up for student government and the sort of the most successful students, right? You need to talk to the ones we often do student journey mapping for the failed student journey. In other words, the person who did stop out, like what was their journey and how do you solve for that, as opposed to the success story. That's great, thank you. Well, let's go to the Harper team, the Harper Northern Illinois team. And so, you know, we throw around the term co-design a lot, and we got a question from the audience about this, you know, how do you get buy-in from administrators? How do you make this not invented? How do you prevent the not invented here issue, or the I'm too busy, the initiative fatigue is the other problem that we hear so much about. How do you deal with that, and how did this process help you deal with that?
This is Ron. I'll give my perspective from NIU. So what we had to do is we had to go to the College of Business, and we had to go to the math department, and we had to initially sell them on the project that we had signed up for. And selling is a strong word. I don't think that they were not interested, but as most people deal with in higher education, we have several projects on our plate at any one point in time. So we had the challenge of being able to go to those respective internal partners to say, here's another initiative that we're working on, but we need your support and we need your buy-in. And no, by the way, the win in this is that we may have the opportunity to increase the number of students who come through NIU and the respective program. And I think we have an opportunity for greater program awareness and exposure. So when we went from that perspective, I think we were able to get some buy-in. Once the departments in the college knew that we were not asking them to come up with a program redesign or make a enormous investment, more so we needed their expertise and consultation, they were more open to being a partner. Secondly, I think that they were, we piqued their interest when we said that there were representatives from who, as well as from Harper, who were interested, their counterparts who were interested in being a part of the conversation as well. So with that being said, I think the folks on our end felt like they had a project that they could have some interest in, and we were not asking them to do more than our counterparts were going to be able to do. So from my perspective, that's what I encountered, and I think for me, that's what made it easier than I anticipated as it relates to having the internal partners be invested in our project.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, from the Harper perspective, I would just add that our president was the one who actually was almost the first involved with our assistant vice president of workforce development. So from the top down at the Harper side, it started at the very top. And so when you start at the very top, participation tends to improve. Even though there's initiative fatigue, it tends to get a little better. But there was still, like Ron said, we had to get people who were buying in from a different academic areas to service areas. But if you can start higher, like, again, as we did, with the president of the college, that certainly will help you to expedite at least the involvement of getting involved with the process. So that's how it really began at Harper with the AVP and the president.
Yeah, and one of the people have mentioned the gallery walk. So after we do the research phase, we basically take snippets and headlines from all of the both quantitative and qualitative research and put it up on the wall and almost hold like a series of open houses to increase the circle of people who feel, like they are being brought to the table to also find insight and share and co-design from the earliest points in the process. And you try and do it in a way that is not time consuming, right? And it's fun. And so you're basically engaging their expertise to help draw insights out of the data. And we have found around the country, working with lots of colleges, that's really helpful, the gallery walk process. And by the way, I should mention, on the website, and we'll plug it again at the end, but on the website is a white paper with links to videos that show you all of these exercises and show actually a lot of the things that the teams here are talking about. It's on the website under the Seamless Transfer Design Challenge page. So there's another, there's actually, could we go back to it, because I do think this question of what did the team do to test solutions with students? We heard from the Florida team a little bit about that, but I don't know whether the Illinois team wants to say, like, it's a little bit, it seems daunting to try to bring students with you every step of the way. Can you give people some reassurance that it's not that hard to pull off to bring students into the process?
Well, I would just say that you definitely want to make sure that you are running the concept by students. And this past year, the NIU, D211, and Harper teams have been presenting this at various admissions events, counselor meetings, college nights, presenting it to parents and the students to really test the reactions. We actually did a District 211 Business Entrepreneurs Club, where over 300 students who were in this club heard a presentation from Ron and I and Danielle at District 211 about the model. So we've been taking a very aggressive stance to continuously run this through students whenever and wherever possible to see what their reaction was. And you really have to do that. Obviously, we know that, but you really have to do that because, ultimately you're going to ask a student to commit to doing this very early on in their high school life. So you want to make sure that the model makes sense. The parent reaction has been very favorable. The student reaction is a little more like, yep, that seems kind of interesting. As soon as I get done with prom, I'll be sure to let you know what I think. But I think you have to keep doing those kind of things because ultimately they're the ones that are going to have to make that commitment. So we've done a lot of discussing it with students. And again, the reaction's been very favorable, which makes us feel like maybe we've got something that we're building on a solid foundation.
Mm-hmm. And to add on to that, Bob said something very telling, which is you have almost two audiences. You have the student audience, you have the parent audience, and we have to make sure that we develop not just collateral, but conversations tailored to each one of those audiences, because each one of those audiences gleans something different from the conversation. So obviously a parent is going to be invested at a level that's different from a student. So we have to make something that's compelling enough for a student to say, this is something I want to commit to early on in my high school career. And it has to be compelling to a parent to say, this is a program that I'd like to send my child to and keep them in state. This is an opportunity for them to stay local or regional and develop the skill set through a branded partnership, from the high school level, starting at the high school level and then ending with a bachelor's degree. And, we have very strong programming. We have very strong curriculum. So the opportunity is there. We just have to find the way to put it together in such a way that it's going to be acceptable and responsive to both of those audiences at the same time.
Thanks. That's helpful. Let's move to the Texas team. So the Illinois team just talked about you have these tests, right? So with the prototyping, you start with a very rough prototype and you add to it and iterate it. And sometimes we do what we call mashups, where you take one prototype and you put it together with another one because there's great elements in both. But eventually you get to something which you're going to actually test in the market. and in some cases, 2 of the teams had to go to get accreditation. I think the Texas team and the Illinois team have had to get accreditation support or approval. But how did you get from prototype to pilot? And how did you incorporate what you learned along the way into what ended up being your pilot? This is for the Texas team.
Okay. Yeah, a couple of things were really important. We had student focus groups. We had the student focus groups talk about what are some of the issues. You can see on the slide some of the issues that we had. But one of the biggest elements in creating the prototype was we had heavy advisor involvement in creating that, the prototype. So we had our advisors talking with UNT advisors, and some of the issues, some of the choke points in transferring were things that maybe should have been obvious to us, but weren't. What combination of courses should you take at the same time? Is time of the day for course offerings a barrier? Yet the things that when advisors actually speak with students and they get the input and they combine with the input from the focus groups, then you learn more about what a real student is, not a theoretical prototype student, but a real student, and again, where their choke points are and where perhaps they could be a little more successful.
Mm-hmm. Jean, did you want to add anything in about this? I mean, I know that you all actually had employers and students take a crack themselves at creating prototypes based on the design criteria. Did they come up with different ways to approach the design question than you all did?
I think one of the key factors or barriers might have been financial issues. And I think that's where our employers and stakeholders at all levels continue to say, well, we've got to make this work in a timely fashion, in a cost-effective manner. And that was one of the things that was so ideal. If the students were working, being able to go to our campus that is right there now in Frisco, they didn't have to change employment strategies. And then so that barrier was removed. And then we did work with some of our employers to look at reimbursement programs for the students if they earn their degrees. So that's pretty exciting.
Mm-hmm. Because you had been, one of the reasons you wanted to do this degree was there had been a degree created like an applied bachelor's degree or applied business degree, right? That you weren't sure how that was playing in the marketplace with employers, and so you really wanted to bring employers right into the design process. Is that correct?
Yes, our employers indicated a business degree was more marketable than the bachelor's in applied arts and science, which was a transfer degree that worked very well for the students who maybe had wandered a little bit and then, decided that they needed to get the degree as quickly and as efficiently as possible. But our BS degree in general business allows them to have the degree with a business title.
Mm-hmm. And that was, employers were really responding way better to that. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's a great point. I think the Texas team probably had the most interaction with employers, and rightly so, given the nature of your design question and design challenge. Okay, let's go to the Virginia team to ask about, the audience members may be at this point sitting back and saying, wow, this sounds like a lot of work. This 2-year process, and I don't want to overwhelm people, because I think we did have a disciplined structured creative process, and so I don't want people to be scared off by it. But we should be very honest about what hurdles we faced along the way. So, do you want to, the Virginia team, do you want to give us a few examples, and we might open this one up to other folks as well, because it's an important topic.
Sure. I think that, many of the teams have talked about just the reality of standing up something new and different and breaking the mold of what has been the typical transfer process, and that any of that work is really challenging, both building buy-in, but also, creating the space for it to happen. And, certainly there's been mention of initiative fatigue or time-based constraints. But I think what was really important for us is we were moving at 100 miles an hour, both because it was really important, but also because of a directive to deliver advance on a certain timeline. And what this process helped us to do, even if it made us stop and pause, was oftentimes take a few steps back. So a lot of times, just because of the place we were in with building the program overall, we'd have already made some decisions around program structure, and then we'd come in and work with the design team and spend dedicated time for a day, really thinking differently about our work, and go, wait, we should be doing it this way, but we already committed to doing it that way. And so getting people to pivot and be willing to take a few steps back for the sake of our students so that we could do it better was sometimes our biggest challenge. And I'll own that as somebody who's very planful and strategic with how much time and resources we have to use, oftentimes I was challenged by the idea of we've already passed that milestone. We can't really go back and change. But being able to see how much more value there would be for our students in doing it differently was really an illuminating part of the process.
Mm-hmm. I mean, could you say that in the long run, that these kinds of processes can save time, or at least make a pilot development process more streamlined?
So I think that, for what we've actually chosen with Vance as our focus area, we really wouldn't have gotten to dive into that in the same ways that we have. So it really accelerated something that we perhaps had lower on our priority list, and allowed us the time and space to focus on that. I think that, working with the lab through the design process on that specific focus really was helpful in the sense of, giving us time and space to do that we weren't committing ourselves, and allowed us an opportunity to, check our own assumptions about things and engage in real conversation about that. To your point of how it's streamlined, I think in some cases it could almost feel like it was taking us off course because this project came in where we had already built something or mapped out our process. And so, but what I was trying to say was that it wasn't without value. When we paused or went off of our originally passed course, we gained so much more on behalf of our students.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone else want to, this is the last question before we're going to go to some audience questions for a few minutes. But does anyone else want to say anything about hurdles and challenges as you went through the year or the year and a half? So there were no other challenges or hurdles.
No. Hi, Kathleen. We have Julie from Miami-Dade.
Okay, great.
Hi, this is Julie, and I will just open the veil of the curtain just a little bit for a glimpse, and say that because the process is lengthy in time over a calendar, for an institution that is rather streamlined in its personnel from the administrative perspective, continuity was quite a challenge. We had a core team, but that core team shifted and evolved and devolved over the course of the period of time. And you really need to have a group of people that are invested and stick with the entire process to maintain a level of fidelity. And that was a challenge for us.
That's a great point. You had a leadership change in your department with your dean that must have made it challenging. Yeah. Thank you for that. And that is the case at so many colleges with initiatives when you get a leadership change. It's something we all. But I mean, I do feel like the family that's created and the channel that's created is actually very useful because that gains its own momentum. So that's helpful.
Well, and the cross-institutional, time spent is very productive.
Yeah. Okay, great. Leslie, do you want to tell us if there's some audience questions? I know we're seeing them come by, but do you have a few that you want to throw out?
Yeah, sure. I think that you guys, when I say you guys, I mean those participants and our panelists today, talked a little bit about this. And so, but one of the questions that we had from the audience is really, how did the team decide which relevant voice needed to be addressed as part of this challenge? I know that we have lots of different students across our campuses. So I'm gonna start with the first person that I see here in my thing, which is Bob from Harper. So Bob, can you start us off with this? So how did the Illinois team decide which relevant voice needed to be addressed as part of this challenge?
Which relevant voice? Are you referencing the students in that relevant voice question? Because I think that's kind of.
I don't know. You tell me, right?
All right, so we're gonna say the students because I think when you're looking at it, the challenge itself was to get more people to complete a bachelor's degree. And so when we started to look at the factors that were going to affect that goal being met, we obviously needed to start with the data and start with the students and learn about kind of what they were going through, what their perceptions were, and to sort of understand, like we talked about earlier, the different personalities, personas that come out of a process like this. But I think the relevant voice for us is to try to figure out, how could we help more students be successful, and to get to understand, I think more importantly, what students need throughout their transitions from point A to point B to point C. That's kind of what I think was the most relevant voice for us in this conversation, but maybe Ron has something he'd like to add.
I would agree.
Wait, you're still muted. Go ahead.
I would agree with Bob. The student definitely is a relevant voice and probably the most relevant voice. In support of that, I also believe that we had a team of 6. So we had 2 from NIU, 2 from Harper, and 2 from D211. And if you can imagine, 3 different institutions, 3 different cultures, 3 different processes, 3 different points of view as it relates to this particular project. And I think that we did a very good job of hearing everyone's voice in our respective conversations. And even if there was respectful, let's say, disagreement, we always were able to glean something important from the conversations. And it helped to continue to refine our message and refine our project and fine tune our prototype. So as much as the student is a relevant voice, the team, we all brought unique perspectives and institutional perspectives that had to be listened to and respected. And, we had to compromise and collaborate. So for me, that was one of the more exciting parts of the experience.
All right. Thanks, Illinois. And then Janie?
So I'm going to go also with obviously the students, but I'm going to give it sort of a little bit of a spin in that sort of in a large 30,000 foot landscape, despite the vast opportunities for personal advancement in STEM careers, and not to mention addressing societal challenges that affect the entire planet, the education landscape itself hasn't really optimized to prepare historically underrepresented students or financially disadvantaged groups. And I think that's where this opportunity for Miami-Dade and FIU to focus on that particular student is critical.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And then that we see that so much in every one of your design challenges, that you're ending up, your pilots are all really geared towards the non-traditional, the new traditional students, and that's exciting. Okay, so we're now going to go to, we have a series of what's next questions, which we don't have pegged to a particular institution, so anyone can answer these, but we don't all have to answer all of them. But I think this will really be helpful for the audience members who might be thinking, you know, could I use one of your pilots, or what are you doing next with your pilots? So let's start with where do you expect to go in your ability to scale within and between your institutions for this pilot, or what else you could do together now that you have a channel, we call it a design channel, you know, between you that represents the whole student pathway, and you have some tools in the form of you know, human-centered design and prototyping and piloting. Does anybody want to take that?
I think we have Team Florida on the line. It's going to answer that one for us, Kathleen.
Sure, this is Julie, and towards the end of the design process, an idea emerged that we would devote our next phase efforts to building an online seamless transfer map. And there were some creative ideas around what that map might include. And so we've taken that beginning of an idea, we submitted a proposal to a funder, and we have now been awarded a pretty healthy amount of funding to build that map. And we'll start with biology because we've got the course sequences lined up. And then we'll expand to our pathways, our local pathways with between MDC and FIU. But what we plan to do is build the infrastructure so that it could be transportable to other partnerships and other situations in other states.
Wow, that's fantastic. So are you saying that really that you're going to be creating a map that is really helping your STEM students understand, you know, sort of the curriculum pathway, but it could be applicable to many other sets of pairs of institutions,
yes,
or at least customizable for them?
Yep, that's exactly what I'm saying.
And what's your timing on that, Julie or Janie? Because I think a lot of people will be interested, and we could be. We're very happy to be instrumental in helping, you know, disseminate the tools, if you will.
Thank you, and actually we are counting on it. It's a pretty aggressive timeline. We hope to have some of the beginning components of it ready for focus groups and piloting in 2020. And so, but with the full launch towards the end of 2020.
That's great. And could we ask? I know that the Virginia team has also had, you're really at the cutting edge around thinking how AI or sort of pre-AI, you know, chatbots can help scale success coaching. I feel like you're kind of on the leading edge of that piece of work. And will there be anything that you can share with others, or can we learn from you so we don't have to blaze the trail ourselves?
Yeah, so
Go
ahead, Barbara.
Well, I was just going to say, one of the things that we've realized in trying to look at what's already out there is there isn't anything out there that we have found that really meets our needs. There's a lot of stuff out there for an individual institution, but to cut across two institutions, we just haven't found that. And so, so we're going to continue looking. That's sort of why we scaled back what we were doing, and we're starting with the web web questions, a chat bot. We do have a chat bot already at Nova, and we'll see how we can incorporate that. But just we're still looking for that and still trying to see if there's a way that we can make that work. But that's something that's just going to be, it's going to take longer than, than what we had initially anticipated.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great.
Yeah, I think that it's really easy for us to think because Siri or Alexa take care of all of our problems for us in our homes, that it's just that simple for us to put that together for our students on our campuses. And I know there are campuses who have even embedded those kinds of technology into their campus through, Echo Dots in their residence halls or things like that. And we've been exploring, the different things other institutions have done. But the reality is that building that technology to be fully functional and really serve the needs that a student presents is a significant undertaking. And, if anybody's looking for a business opportunity, certainly there's a market there in higher ed, specifically, across institutions or even in kind of a more specialized space than the general, what time is the recreation center open on campus?
Right. Right. And then we won't do the other two teams for this question because we want to get to the last questions, but we'll just say that for both the Illinois team and the Texas team, we'll be publishing your results as we have them, and because I think there's a lot to learn that other campuses can really learn from what you all are doing, as well as you see what the take-up rate for a degree in 3 and for this undecided, let's call it the undecided transfer plan that Texas is doing. There'll be a lot of interest there, so we'll continue to follow. We do have, by the way, 4 years of evaluation of these programs. It's funded through this design challenge, so there will be some nice outcomes data. So what's next? Okay, so now we're moving to how you would recommend the other 2- and 4-year college pairs who are interested in your pilot, how should they consider whether or should, or how could they or would they implement? Does anyone want to tackle that one?
I think we have the team from Texas.
Oh, great.
The one big thing is get business and industry involved. If you have a good outlet for that and you have a community that you're familiar with, yeah, their input is very valuable.
Mm-hmm. But how would they feel, like you had to take this particular plan, your pathway plan, to get it approved for accreditation, right? Through your accreditor. How should others consider whether they have a good shot at that? I mean, how easy was that to do? How hard was it to put together?
Go ahead, Cameron.
No, actually, Jean can better address that because it's UNT that went through accreditation. But I will say the complete buy-in by their faculty was the big factor.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Of course, it had to go through a curriculum process within the college and then at the university level. And then we took it to the state level. And our business college has the business accreditation, so it had to go through our business accreditation. The way we were able to do this, it was a non-substantive change at our regional accreditation, and we did have to work very closely with them to make that happen. Otherwise, the process would have taken us a little bit longer, and we wanted to be sure we were able to open the pilot in the fall.
Mm-hmm. And how many students, do you know yet how many have signed up for it, or is that going to be known in the fall?
We have some indications right now because we are doing, orientations and advising, and we're finding that people are finding us outside of the path that we sort of thought was open to all through our Collin advisors and our advisors at our new campus on the Frisco, but others are finding us. So we are anxious to think that we will probably have about 50 students for the fall.
Mm-hmm. That's a nice size pilot. Test it out. Great.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Okay. And anyone else want to take? Well, we probably have time for one other group to take that question, and then we have one last question.
I think from the Illinois side, I think what we're doing is assessing market reaction throughout the year and trying to determine how many students are interested. We have an inquiry form. We've been doing a lot of events, trying to see how many students are willing to sit down with our high school counselor and kind of look at what they're currently doing and really looking for some commitments from students for fall of 20 that are looking to be part of this program. So right now we continue to be in a test and evaluation mode, and we're going to let the student voice sort of help us make the determination of whether we go forward or not.
Mm-hmm. Right. So what is the impact you're looking for in the pilot, or what are the indicators that you're looking for in the pilot that would suggest that yes, we should expand and make this a real offering?
Well, because I think you have to do some adjustments in high school if you're going to try to go from, maybe not knowing what you want to do to doing a business program. There's a particular pathway. You need to start making some adjustments to your schedule. I think you want to communicate again with the different institutions that you're interested in being part of this. And we have a kind of a goal number in mind, but I think initially we just want to see if there's enough of a critical base in order to say, yeah, we've got enough to say it's definitely going. But I think that's really going to be such an important part of the fall, going into this fall, to make sure that students who are interested are actually taking an action. We've developed a comprehensive workflow between District 211 and Northern to track and record every step in engagement throughout the process.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, and the last question that we have that we have planned is around what advice or guidance you would offer to your peers in the transfer community. So that would be those who are on this call, and probably the person calling in on the phone there has a question, right? If you want to map the student journey and test and design and test solutions, what should your peers in the transfer community do? Florida, do you want to go first on this question?
Sure. I think this is Janie. I think honestly, everything starts with data. I think you have to really understand your students as much as you possibly can. Ask yourself, are you tracking them? And if you're tracking them, how? Are you looking at the most popular majors so that whatever design or solutions you come up with are having a larger impact? Are we making decisions that are data informed, and certainly find those gaps, and my guess is that you will find them because I think we all have them. And I think, sometimes there, certain things like Julie was saying earlier, sort of behind the curtain, and what you see is to look at our own policies. Sometimes we have policies that create unnecessary barriers, and some of them may be policies that were there from 20 years ago that made sense 20 years ago and don't make sense today. So I would say to do a deeper dive into sort of the history of the transfer process and what's in place and what can be revisited. And I think really, Kathleen, to add to something that was in the earlier question and my experience with this process in its entirety, with design thinking is to trust the process. It's almost difficult to even explain what that means, but there is this element of the process that you start this piece, you think you've made headway, you come into it, you're excited, then you take 2 steps back, and there's a little frustration in that. But then again, and somebody said this earlier, you see the value of that and you understand why it has to happen. And then you keep moving forward and before you know it, you really arrive where you needed to arrive sort of without even knowing it. Even though you planned it, you could say, okay, I had this idea of what we can do. There really is this element of trusting it because it does work in its own way to get you to where you need to be. And I think that's important because the process can be a little bit intimidating for those who haven't gone through design thinking, me being one of them.
It's
And
funny,
this is Julian. I will just add that I would recommend that you and your partner institution or institutions make a commitment, make a leadership commitment, make a resource commitment, make a time commitment, and really think of it not as an initiative, not as a project, but as a real interest in transforming the student experience.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And I wanted to just remind Janie of the quote that she gave somewhere in May. We've been like a year into the process, and we were sort of coming out of the fog, out of the fuzzy front end. The fuzzy front end, as it's called in design thinking, and you used the word magical. You said, this is magical, and I thought that was really fun.
It felt magical at that moment, trust me. I saw the light. I saw the light at the end of the tunnel, finally.
Yeah, that was great. Okay, so would anyone else want to chime in on that one, on this question? We do have a specific question for Virginia for the advanced program. This is a good question. Who pays for the success coaches? Obviously, there's not enough money for success coaches, which is why you were looking for ways to expedite the Q&A process. But who pays for them?
Yes. Oh, go ahead, Sally.
In setting this up, it is a shared funding model, so both institutions are contributing in the ways that they can to the funding. So the salaries are really split 50-50, as well as for our executive director of our program. And then each of the institutions is in their own way kind of supporting with space and resources around computers and things like that. So we've kind of didn't split necessarily 50-50 buying everybody a computer, but, Mason bought the computer and then Nova bought the docking stations and resources that needed to happen on the campuses around Northern Virginia for the coaches to be mobile and things like that. So we've really entered into it in a shared funding model.
Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to say that I think some of the focus groups that we had with the Mason students who had signed up for this advanced program, which is, takes you all the way through from Nova to Attainment, if you want to transfer, it was that the success coaches was the thing that they were most excited about why that was the biggest piece of the value proposition for them. And I think that really speaks to this sense of belonging and sense of trust, that someone that you can call your success coach that transcends the two different institutions. Well, and that was very telling to me that was the value proposition for folks. And I think that's an interesting design element. So with that, I think we should let's go to the picture of the whole cohort, the photograph that says thank you, because I think we have been getting the questions along the way. So this was when everyone gathered in Texas last May. It was exactly a year ago when we'd just gone from, each team came to Texas with 4 prototypes, and UNT hosted this meeting. We each came with 4 prototypes that they'd worked through the year, and then had to narrow it down to the one pilot that you heard described today. And look at the sense of accomplishment on everybody's faces. Right? I feel like everybody felt like it a sense of relief, right? And this was actually the day that Janie used the word magical, I think. So I wanted to thank the teams because you've been great in this year since this Texas meeting, because that was the last time we all got together. You've been great, and enthusiasm has remained high as you've actually implemented and set up your pilots, which are now all, about to launch. So I wanted to thank you for that. And Leslie, what else do we need to tell folks? We want to make sure that if you want to download the white paper, which goes into detail about specifically the design year, and with some videos for each part of the process, and a little bit more on each of the pilots, you can access that the white paper there. And we also want to give a special thanks to the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, which was our funder for this grant, and has been a terrific supporter along the way in first, seeing the challenge that that people, that colleges and community colleges and universities are seeing in transfer, and how it is, really one of the biggest issues presenting leadership teams as they try and move towards, greater levels of attainment, greater numbers for attainment. We also really want to thank the National Institute for the Study of Transfer Students. They have been fantastic all along the way, and are kind of a partner in this webinar. If you want to follow our work generally at the lab, we have the Innovator Network sign up is here too. We don't spam you. We send something out about every 2 weeks about what we're up to, and also the RFPs. That's how we solicited entries for this design challenge. Is the first word went out through the Innovator Network. So with that, Leslie, is there anything else we need to do besides thanking all of our guests today and the audience?
No, I think you've wrapped it up pretty well, and said thank you so much to everybody. And I just always want to remind everybody that the conversation can always keep going. So keep those tweets coming at that hashtag seamless transfer. And if you have questions that come up later today or throughout the next couple of weeks as you reflect on this webinar, which will be posted to our website here in a few days, we will get to all those questions and provide those answers for you.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Well, thank you. Yeah, goodbye, everyone. Thank you guys so much. Bye.
Great job.